So thank you everyone. There we go. Thank you everyone for attending. All these authors have their books for sale, so please support them and all the wonderful work that they're doing. So this is our panel, All the Feels, Book, Kids, and Emotions. I'm here to introduce Ronni Diamondstein. Hello, Ronni. Ronni has had a long career in children's literature. She's a retired school library media specialist, a former member of the Chappaqua Children's Book Festival Board of Directors, a freelance writer, and currently a member of the Board of Trustees of the Chappaqua Library and the Board of the Newcastle Community Media Center. She lives in Chappaqua with her dog, Maggie May. Thank you, Ronni, for being here.
And thank you, Dan. So, good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here today and thrilled. I was thrilled when Dawn Greenberg asked me to moderate a panel about books and emotions, a subject close to my heart. And I was thrilled to have these four compassionate authors join me today to talk about the books that they have written about emotions and how books can help children deal with their feelings. I'm going to introduce them now. Holly McGhee is the author of the middle grade novel Matilda, Bright and Tender, a Bank Street and ABC Best Book of the Year, the New York Times best-selling E.B. White Read Aloud finalist, Come With Me, illustrated by Belgian artist Pascal Lemaitre, and Listen, a new collaboration with Lemaitre, which is getting amazing reviews now and acclaim. She divides her time between New York City, where she helps bring books she loves into the world as a literary agent, and Maplewood, New Jersey. And next to her is Sujean Rim, and she's been at our book festival since it started. She is the author and illustrator of the Verde book series, Zoogie Boogie Fever, Chi-Ki, A Panda in Bearland, and more. She recently illustrated I Love My Glamour, and originally she's a shoe and accessory designer. Sujean has continued to freelance design and illustrate for a variety of clients that include Tiffany & Company, Daily Candy, Target, Bloomingdale's, Trish McAvoy. She lives in Westchester with her author, illustrator husband, Bob Bianchini, who's also here today, and their son, Charlie. And then we have Lizzy Rockwell, who's an author and illustrator best known for her nonfiction picture books on wellness and nature. She also has illustrated numerous books by her mother, the late Anne Rockwell, who's a wonderful children's book author. And today she's here with her new book, How Do You Feel?, which employs minimal text and a rich visual narrative about children at the park to encourage readers to identify feelings in themselves and in others. And next to me, Susan, is Susan Verde, who grew up in Greenwich Village in New York City. She earned a bachelor's degree in elementary education and a master's in reading remediation, and became an elementary school teacher for many years. She's the author of numerous titles that include The Museum, The Water Princess, Rock and Roll Soul, Hey Wall, a story of art and community, and Unstoppable Me. Her New York Times bestseller, I Am Human, a book of empathy, is part of a best-selling series including I Am Yoga and I Am Peace. And the latest book, which is now number 7 on the New York Times bestseller list, I Am Love, a book of compassion. In addition to writing, Susan teaches yoga and mindfulness to kids of all ages. Susan lives in East Hampton, New York with her twin boys, Joshua and Gabriel, her daughter Sophia, and their menagerie of pets. So children have a full range of emotions, some of which are too big to keep inside, and every child handles their feelings differently. Learning to deal with them is an important part of growing up. Picture books are incredible vehicles for helping kids understand and manage their emotions. As a children's librarian, this is something close to my heart. Putting the right book into the right hands of the right child was always important to me. And teachers and parents frequently have asked me for books that could help their children with different emotions and anger and being in bad moods. And I've always believed that books can change the world and that a book can make you feel that you're not alone. Fairy tales are great examples of stories that help children deal with their feelings. Think about Little Red Riding Hood, Cinderella, Hansel and Gretel, and the lessons of those stories. And there are some classic children's picture books that deal with emotions, like Alicky's Feelings, Eric Carle's The Grouchy Ladybug, Judy Bjork's Alexander and the Terrible, Horrible, No Good, Very Bad Day, and Caldecott Medal winner When Sophie Gets Angry, Really, Really Angry by Molly Bang, and the story of Ferdinand by Monroe Leaf. And then there's Pizza Pizza by William Steig that I love, and I'm going to ask Holly McGhee to weigh in this book too. Holly and I have a special connection to the beloved author and illustrator and cartoonist William Steig, who also was the author of Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, Brave Irene, which is, of course, a book about being not afraid, and the chapter book Dominic that I recommend to adults as well as children. People always ask authors, how do you get your ideas? And this is a great example. Pizza Pizza is the story of a little boy who was in a bad mood because it's raining outside, so his father plays a game with him to turn him into a pizza. Holly was Bill's editor at HarperCollins, so I'd like her to turn to the panelists now to talk about where they get their inspiration for books about emotions, and we'll start with Holly, who can expand on Pizza Pizza and talk about her own inspiration. Holly.
Thank you, Ronni. Pizza Pizza, I'm really glad you brought it up because it was published in 1998, and I had a career as an editor at HarperCollins before I became an agent and a writer. And by a happy set of circumstances, I became William Steig's editor when he was 86 years old. And I worked with him until he died at age almost 96. And I had never edited a book before, but he had had an argument with my boss, and he said, if Holly doesn't become my editor, I'm going back to Farrar, Straus, Giroux. And so, like that, I became his editor, and I was sent to Boston to work with him on a new book, and I was supposed to return with something for HarperCollins to publish. So I stayed with him and his wife, Jean, who's still one of my best friends. She's about to turn 90. And I stayed with them, and it was the first time I had a credit card to buy meals for them on HarperCollins and things like that. So we went out to eat a lot, and we went shopping, and we didn't come up with a book to do together. And it was time for me to go back to New York City. And Bill was extremely concerned that I would go home empty-handed and get in trouble. And I was too young to know that was a possibility, but he was right. And so I said to him, well, did you ever play any games with your kids when they were little? And he said, and it was about an hour before I left, and he said, well, I used to turn Maggie into a pizza. And I said, it's Maggie. And I said, well, that should be your next book. And a month later, the full dummy arrived in my office. I changed one word in it. It was ready to go. And it was about turning a little boy who is upset because it's raining, finding something to do with him inside, putting him on the kitchen table, and adding cheese and pepperoni, pieces of paper and checkers, and things like that, and turning him into a pizza. So that was Bill's inspiration for Pizza Pizza was simply a question I posed.
So why don't you tell us about your inspiration for Listen?
Sure, so my inspiration for my new book, Listen, happened at the launch party for my first collaboration with Pascal Lemaitre, Come With Me. And it happened at Rizzoli Bookstore when someone in the audience was describing Pascal's mother-in-law, who was a humanitarian who worked for Refugees International. In fact, she died while working in Kosovo at way too young an age. So we were talking about her on stage, and someone in the audience described her, and he said, her eyes were as big as her ears. And it was during the presentation in front of all these people at Rizzoli, I got out my pen and I jotted that line down because I didn't want to forget it. And that inspired me to write a book about listening with all of our senses, our eyes, our ears, our nose, our mouth, our hands, but most of all, listening with our hearts, which I think is one thing that isn't being taught enough in school. And my belief is that if we can start children listening to their hearts at a really young age and shutting out the noise, we can change the world.
Sujean, you, a lot of your books have a lot to do with self-esteem and being an individual. Can you talk about your inspiration for that?
Well, I feel like the background of me becoming an author illustrator for children's books, it's evolved so much. As a kid, I've always loved books, and being read to really wasn't part of growing up for me. My parents, English was their second language, and we didn't really have books, and it wasn't until schools and librarians and teachers that would read to me that it entered my world, and I just loved being transported, and I knew at an early age I wanted to be an artist. And so I've always, and because I think English wasn't the first language of my parents, there's a lot of emotions that weren't really said, or I had to learn how to kind of express myself at a young age. And then honestly now, being a mom myself has changed how I want to write, what kind of writer I want to be, just because it's just really changed everything, being responsible for another child. And this, Cheeky's probably my most personal book, because it's just about wanting to fit in, and just wanting to nurture children's and everyone's emotional intelligence. I feel like we all advocate for math and reading. I feel like emotional intelligence and just understanding, just being self-aware, is so important in how you act and are throughout your life. And I feel like I lost track of your question.
Oh, well, we're just going to talk about your inspiration, and you told us that. So that's what this is panel. It's not school. Even though I told you have to behave, all of these people are friends, so it makes it more fun for them, and it's fun for us too. So that was beautiful, and I think sharing about your childhood and not expressing emotion that's something that you now are mindful of, and you're showing and sharing with the rest of the world in your books, and it's certainly great for your child as well. So I think that's wonderful. So thank you. And Lizzy, you want to tell us about how do you feel and how that, the genesis of that?
I'm not going to hold it up because I'm too short to really be seen well behind it, but this is my new book, How Do You Feel? And different from Sujean, I grew up around children's books. Both of my parents were children's book illustrators, Ann and Harlow Rockwell, and their studio was in our house, so I literally would come home from school and look over my mom's shoulder and see what she was up to, and my dad too. And they were also amazing lovers of art and literature, so the house was just tumbling over with piles of books, and we looked at a lot of art. We traveled and went to museums. I did that when I was very little, and I was really interested in Renaissance painting when I was like 7. And they were little stories to me. These paintings were so rich because in medieval and Renaissance Europe, not that many people were literate, so they told the stories of the Bible, these really important stories that the church was investing a lot for people to learn these stories and paying, top dollar for the best artists to tell these stories and pictures. And then I studied art history in college and really looked more at painting. And so I came to illustration a lot from art history, and I love the power of telling a story in a picture. And the writing I've done has all been very explanatory writing. So how your body uses nutrients, or how the body systems work in the Busybody book. And then I did a book about mammals. Well, they're different from the other classes of animals. And I love explaining stuff, but this book has less than 50 words, and I do all the explaining in the art. And I also, usually when I do a picture book, a science picture book, I do tons of research, and I look at, thousands of photographs, and I go in the field. And the sketches and finishes for this, I basically did from my head. So I used memory and empathy and dug deep into my own feelings and my memory of raising children and all the many, mine are grown, but all the many young children I still know. And I just tried to get inside their little heads and understand how they were feeling, and remembering that feelings were so fluid, that this all happens maybe in 10 minutes. I'm not really sure how much time goes on at the park that all these 10 emotions come up in somebody's experience, but they might be seen later in a new emotion. And so I wanted it to be a book about emotion that was socially, in a social context, quite realistic in terms of place, and I'm kind of concrete, so my stuff is very literal and sort of solid. But these kids move through a certain space and experience all these emotions, help each other, upset each other, and ultimately work it out. But I don't explain any of that in the text. Each page is a rhetorical question. Do you feel sad? Do you feel happy? And then we look at the art and figure out why this child feels that way. So it was a total departure for me from the work I've done. And I agree with everyone here that the emotional education of a child is the most important thing we can help them along with, and they can help us along with. Because I feel like children, they are still more innately emotionally intelligent in a way than adults. But they don't yet have the vocabulary. But they know how they feel. They don't really have to sort it out. They're quite in touch with their emotions, but they don't have the vocabulary yet to explain it. So they might act out, or they might just feel very frustrated. So we give them the language, and then in turn, they turn around and show us how to be more emotionally honest and expressive. So I think we can really help each other.
That's great, thank you. Susan, you've had quite a history of your I Am series, and now you have Unstoppable Me. Why don't you tell us about the inspiration for all of that?
I can do that. But just as an aside, I just have to say that Holly McGhee was my first agent and incredibly instrumental in getting this whole being an author piece of my life started. So I have so much gratitude and love, yeah. And I did go swimming once in William Steig's indoor swimming pool because his granddaughter, Melinda Franceschini, was my 3rd grade best friend. So there you go. I didn't even know where I was. We're all connected.
Well, the day before they moved from Connecticut to Boston, William Steig, he was in his 80s, and to say goodbye to the house, he did a backflip into the pool.
That's amazing. So there's that connection. I've been writing this I Am series, and I have this new one, Unstoppable Me, which I'll hold them up at some point. But I think my inspiration really started when I was a kid, and I had a lot of anxiety and some OCD and some things going on that my parents, we had lots of books, and thank God for that, because my parents, as much as I love them and they loved me, they didn't have any understanding of what was going on with me. And like you said, I didn't have the language to kind of express what was happening. So I just had all these feelings, and books were one of the ways that I got through that. And then I became an elementary school teacher, and the kids in my class were just like that too. They had all these, and they were little, I was a kindergarten teacher, but they had all of these emotions and all of these ways they felt and were trying to express, and were struggling with them. Even just, little things like learning how to share, or learning how to tell someone that you're sad or you need space or whatever, and then to take care of yourself. So I was trying to manage all of those emotions in my classroom while at the same time teaching them. And I was a collector of picture books, and I always felt that as a teacher, that was a surefire way to reach these kids. And so I began writing, just for my own emotional health. And by the time I got to Holly, I had a stack of things. But so these I Am books and the Unstoppable Me books, they're really a way to help children cope and deal with their feelings. And like you said, it's giving them that emotional language, but it's also letting them know that these are already things that are within them. You know, these are not things that are out there in the ether that they have to grasp at and yet another thing to learn. These are parts of themselves. You know, they are empathetic humans. They are full of love and compassion. They are full of peace, but they just may not know how to access that yet. And so the books, I was inspired by all of that to write these books that help kind of give them these tools and let them know that whatever they're experiencing is okay, and they're not alone, and there are ways to get help and to help yourself. Unstoppable Me is really a celebration of kids with a ton of energy and flipping the perspective, you know, instead of all the labels that we have for these kids, or telling them to sit still, or, you know, you move too much, or this or that, is really celebrating that movement. Like, this is an amazing thing. You have a superpower. You may not be able to sit through a lesson, but that doesn't mean you're not listening. Maybe you need to move your body in order to learn more, but all of these things should be celebrated. So I guess, you know, the inspiration is the kids I taught, my own children who have their own forms of anxiety and whatever, and myself, and just kind of trying to work through it all.
So I'm going to just throw this out, and anyone can answer it, and I want you to like ask each other things too. But what kind of reactions have you gotten from either kids, teachers, librarians to your books? I'm hoping that I know you have book signings and you connect with people, and this is certainly a great opportunity today. So does anyone want to chime in on that? Holly? Okay.
I was just going to say that in getting to do all these visits at schools, I'm so happy to see that so many schools are incorporating the social emotional learning curriculum in their schools, and the responses and reactions. I mean, every day I see post after post of teachers using the books, kids creating, you know, hearts and talking about the different things that make them human and the different ways they can act with compassion, and they're just really incorporating the books into their curriculum, and it's been like a huge honor. I mean, I'm amazed. It's funny, sometimes the publisher will talk about creating a teacher's guide, but then I look at what teachers, they're already doing so much beyond what I could ever think of. So it's been really thrilling to see how they're responding.
I just wanted to say something actually that relates to Susan, who had a huge influence on one of my kids' life. And there was a little boy on Twitter at an elementary school in somewhere in the Northeast, and he did a little video review of Listen, and he said, this book is about sharing. And I thought about how when my oldest was 12, we were called into school because he had suicidal ideations, and the school was worried he was going to hurt someone. And we started this journey to psychiatrists and doctors, and we were told he was going to live with us forever, basically, would need a caregiver through college. He was borderline schizophrenic. And after a year of like psychiatric drugs and treatment, he really wasn't much better, although his suicidal thoughts had gone away. And it was tough going for me, and Susan had asked me to talk to her about possibly becoming my client, and we went out to lunch. And I was at the breaking point, and I spilled my entire story of everything that was going on with my son to Susan, who had never met me, but sometimes we have that new anonymous person who absorbs like whatever we suddenly have to get off our chest. And she said, "Have you ever heard of Lyme disease?" And that started this journey into Lyme, and it turned out after a long, lengthy diagnostic process, my son had neuropsychiatric Lyme disease that had gotten into his brain. And he's better now. It was about 6 years of treatment, but it was because I shared my story with Susan, and she shared her story with me, and those little boys' words just struck me in the heart. And I recently wrote a Washington Post essay about my son's journey through Lyme, and I was at an elementary school in Michigan last week, and I said, I didn't tell the kids the Lyme disease story because they were kindergarteners, but I said, I hope that after I leave today, each of you will share a story about yourselves with someone else in the class who doesn't know that thing about you. And then I asked the teacher to share something about, it happened, they all happened to be women that day, so herself, and she did. And after I asked the question to one class, this little girl raised her hand, and she said, I just learned how to tie my shoes. And I said, that's amazing, like, congratulations. And then this little boy, 2 people away, raised his hand, and he couldn't barely look at me, and he said, I don't know how to tie my shoes yet. And then he stuck his foot up, and he said, that's why I'm wearing Velcro. And I said, well, this is perfect, because she shared a story that we didn't know about her, and you shared something we didn't know about you. So what's going to happen now? And of course, she was going to teach him to tie our shoes. And I said, I feel like we could solve all the problems in the world if we all shared our stories.
Holly, I'm so glad you shared that story with us, because that everyone should read that. That essay. It was very moving and very brave of you also to share that story, and I think it could help a lot of people. So we have a lot of Lyme disease around here. So
Yeah, I'll actually be speaking with Project Lyme on December 2nd in New York City with some other writers who have recently written about Lyme disease too.
That's amazing.
Lizzy, do you want to go ahead, Lizzy? I hear you.
Oh, well, no, did you have a specific
No,
question?
I also want to hear more about your relationship with your mother and the emotional connection there, and your writing. Anne Rockwell has, I don't know how many books,
About
but
200.
200, I was going to say, a couple hundred books. And when I saw her this morning, I said, Apples and Pumpkins. It's like a classic that they collaborated on together, so, and it's timely and seasonal, so.
Well, unfortunately, it's not here to sign,
I
but
know.
I won't pump it up too much. But that's the first book I illustrated, and my father was going to illustrate it as part of a series they had been doing together. But he died of emphysema before he finished the third one, My Spring Robin. And I was in my 20s. I was working as an illustrator for magazines and book jackets, and my mom asked me to finish the last few pages from his dummy, and it was a very poignant time. I was really grief-stricken, of course. It wasn't unexpected because he'd been sick for a long time, but it's always unexpected, right? Especially when it's your first loss, your first big loss as a young person. And then Macmillan at the time allowed me to do the fourth one. So it was Apples and Pumpkins. And my mom had done the book dummy for my dad. They were a very symbiotic, artistic couple. And my mom had written the story, done the book dummy. My dad had established the character and the style of the art and everything. So it was more like a Renaissance apprenticeship, you know, where you're trying to copy Raphael and, you know, learn, not be yourself, but learn from the master. And so I feel like my start in children's books was an apprenticeship, and so when people ask me how to break into the business, I say, well, you can't really do it the way I did it, because it was such a weird path. But it was sort of intimidating to follow my parents. I'm a big fan, so it's taken me quite a long time to have the confidence to be Lizzy Rockwell, you know, but I think I'm almost ready, 58, I think I got this.
Doing great.
Thank you.
So, Sujean, do you want your books? I'm sure you've gotten amazing reactions too. So, you want to talk about that a little bit?
I also would like to, like Susan, I love Holly. She's my editor. She's my agent as well, and I owe so much thanks to her because I was lucky getting into children's book. I feel like when I kind of went through the side back door because I didn't have an agent, and I did Verde's Big Girl Shoes, and I really wrote that because I was a shoe designer, and I kind of you just write what you know, and I wasn't really thinking anything much would come after that first book, but it turned into a series of 6, and I was so grateful to Holly because as much as I'm super grateful for getting to do Verde, I was also very self-conscious because I was entered this children's book world, and I was worried that Verde would just be perceived as some fashionista, and I wanted so much to have more of a message, so I made sure that Verde always had a message about it's okay being you, you know, even though you love, yes, you can dress in pretty dresses, but as long as there's something more. I just always wanted, it's just very much important for me to have it more dimensional. And so when I told her I wanted to do something outside of Verde, her support was great because it allowed me to think of Cheeky, which is really more of a personal narrative. As I said, becoming a parent really kind of changed a lot for me in how I work and how I think. So my parents are from South Korea, and my dad came here because he's an athlete. He was on some program, and he had the opportunity to come to this country. And so my mom came here like on 5 planes. You know, there was no English, and she had a little baby, my older sister, and they were thrown into the world of not speaking the language, having a different culture, a different set of traditions. And here I am, much later, with the child, and I appreciate them so much, like their story and their journey, and just about fitting in. Like I thought of my mom just trying to fit in. She couldn't really express herself, and all the things that she's gone through, and our kids do the same, you know, if they go to a new school or if they're not feeling, maybe they're feeling a little different. So I had a lot to say, and this book was great going to school. This is actually the first book I really went to I went to a lot of schools with, more than Verde. And it was amazing to see children talk to me about where they come from. Not just the countries they are, but like what they are about, their hobbies, and just how we're all different. And this book really emphasizes empathy, and that we're not alone, and being different is actually an incredible, beautiful thing. So yeah, this book is super meaningful to me because it's really a Valentine to my parents and my kid.
Also, I have to say, I wanted to work with Sujean so badly because I love her drawing so much, and she made me wait about a year.
So, I know as a writer myself, people will say, well, what's the next thing? Like, what's your next thing? Are we on a path now where I think the topic of emotional intelligence is so important, and I know in schools they're doing much more with that because that's so important in development. And so what's the next thing? Or is this a path you're going to follow, or are you just going to see where it goes? Anyone want to chime in on that? I know it's go Holly.
I have, yes, I'm staying on this path because I love it. And I just signed 3 new books with Pascal and our publisher, and the first one surprised me. I got the idea for it on my acupuncturist table. I had to get up with the needles in me and write it down. And it's about abundance. And I'm really excited about the series, and all 3 books will feature the same 2 characters, and there are these bunnies named Large and Small, and basically they just talk to each other through the books, and I love writing what they have to say.
Anybody go, Susan?
Well, I definitely want to stay on this path. I sort of feel like I can't help it. It's kind of, even if I'm writing about something different, there's always going to be this emotional piece, and maybe that's just because I'm full of all kinds of crazy emotions myself. But also, and hopefully I can say this, Holly, so Peter and I have 3 more of the IMs coming, because there are still many things, many tools, many things to grapple with in this world. Yeah, so I'm just going to keep going, hopefully. Knock on wood.
Me too. It's funny, when I told my husband and my son that I was going to be in this panel, they're like, "You're so emotional, of course you're on this panel." I cried at a commercial. So I think emotions are, again, you write what you know, and it'll always be part of what I do. And I recently got my yoga certification. And so
This group is just so connected. It's amazing.
no, I just feel like on and off the matter, everything you do and is just, how you treat people, it really speaks to who I want to be. And I've been talking to Holly for a long time about writing a book about forgiveness. I have a very personal story about that, and just, so yeah, I have a few books that will be very emotional.
Lizzy?
Well, this book only has 10 emotions, and there's a lot more than that. So I would love to do another 10, maybe set at a birthday party, or another like contained setting, because when you write a book that has fewer than 50 words and "do you feel" are repeated on every page, so there's only about 10 new words in there, you do get the itch to add more words in another book. And the response I've gotten, I've shared it with kids in sketch form. And so when the girl's juice gets knocked over by the kid who's sort of absentmindedly playing kickball behind her, she's very mad. And so before I turn the page, I like to ask the kids I guess I could show you that page, but what's gonna happen next. I won't find it in time. Never mind. I'll describe it. Her juice gets knocked over, she can't see what's going on behind her, and the boy clearly doesn't know, he just did something disastrous, but the girl he's playing kickball is looking like, and so I asked the kids, what's gonna happen next, and one kid said, she's gonna throw her sandwich at him because she's holding the sandwich, and he's gonna laugh, or there's a whole bunch of different predictions that they make before I turn the page. And one of them is, he's gonna say he's sorry. And that's what happens when you turn the page. Then it says, do you feel sorry? And the boy is looking really, really sorry. And the first time I showed a sketch to a kid, he goes, oh, he is so sorry. I was like, yes, nailed it. So I intentionally made it so you don't know how these things are going to come out, and that kids will tap into what they've been through and make predictions. And yeah,
Thank you. So we have time for any questions. Does anyone have any questions for Holly, Sujean, Lizzy, or Susan? Yes.
I'm presuming most of your school visits are to elementary schools, but have you seen interest at middle school level, especially about extending this kind of emotional development curriculum or literature in the middle schools?
I get a lot of middle school visits because these emotions, these concepts, the cool thing about picture books is that they take these larger concepts and they break them down and simplify them. So middle schools, are definitely interested in having someone come and talk to their children about empathy. I mean, you can extend the conversation to meet the grade level and the age group. I also get high school students and teachers and librarians reaching out. So I think because the emotions, the concepts, you know, empathy, compassion, all of that are universal, you know, no matter what age, and a lot of adults probably could use some workshops in this stuff too. So I think that's the power of picture books. And the funny thing is, those kids, you know, they may think they're above that it's below their reading level, and for some kids it's not, and they won't say that. But everybody likes a picture book. Everybody likes, I mean, even my high school kids, I still read to them a picture book occasionally. Sometimes it's mine, and then they're not as interested as if it's someone else's, of course. But yeah, so yes, there is interest.
Anyone else?
I've even had my books, I hear from ministers who have read them in church, and like adult women's book club people. So I believe picture books are for every age, and we shouldn't limit ourselves to whatever they say, you know, 4 to 8, or that's just silly, but I guess they have to say something.
And I'll agree with you on that, Holly. When I worked in a high school, I was mainly in elementary school, but I also happened to work a couple of years in a high school. And a lot of times I found there were picture books that teachers could use with a particular subject, or topic. So
I think most of us know this wonderful music teacher in Iowa, TJ Shea, and he has every morning breakfast, what does he call it? Breakfast, and he has these, that usually looks like 4 or 5 football players in high school reading picture books, and he posts on Facebook every day, and it's the greatest thing. We love him.
And we have another question.
This is a little bit about process, and I think it's for Susan and Holly. I'm curious how you work with the illustrator, and do you write? You both work repeatedly with the same artist, and do you create the book together, or do you write the book and then know that the illustrator will convey what you hope for? I mean, how does it work?
I can't speak for Susan, although I do represent her illustrator.
We can speak for
This is very incestuous, Ronni. But I could speak for myself. I'm so close with Pascal. We've been friends for 19 years. And Listen started out as a mood board I made, where I collected my thoughts about listening ever since the Rizzoli lunch party for probably over 6 or 7 months. And he sent me things by email, because he lives in Brussels, that I glued onto the mood board too. So it really became our mood board. And that's where we sort of started just, you know, collecting everything we thought about listening. And from that, I made the story, but he was the first person to read the first most ugly draft of it. And I'm grateful I have him as a sounding board. So but I think it's very unusual to work that closely with someone who's illustrating your book, in my experience.
Yeah, I think what I learned is typically you don't get to talk to your illustrator. Sometimes you don't meet your illustrator through the process, but, and Holly represents Peter Reynolds, so she's privy to everything. But for me and for Peter, I mean, so he gets to see the ugly first drafts, and he sends me sketches here and there. And our first book together, we created together on a series of note cards, which we then mailed into Holly. Yeah, so, and actually, I don't know if you remember.
Those note cards were funny, because Peter, often people come up to him all the time and he can't say no, and he'd send like really people without too much talent my way, and sometimes I would be frustrated because it took my time to reject them kindly. But this one, he kept saying, "Did you get that package yet? Did you get that package yet?" from Susan Barrett, and he asked enough times that I was ready for it. And because it was at such a higher level than the usual people he flicked over to me.
I'm so glad. But yeah, and actually, I don't know if you remember, but we had our first, that was the museum we did together, and our first sort of celebratory cocktail in the city with the publisher and Holly and Peter and I were there, and our editor said, okay, so now that we've signed the contracts and everything, you guys know that you can't speak to each other about the book anymore. And we were like, and we looked at her and we were like, sure, okay. Yeah, so but that is unusual, typically, that kind of collaboration. But yeah, there's a lot of back and forth because we trust each other in that way and we're working towards the same goal.
I remember this jacket we were having so much trouble with, and Pascal and I came up with it while I was on a beach vacation, and every night after everyone went to bed, we were just firing back and forth. It wasn't right, it wasn't right, it wasn't right, and then it was finally right.
Well, thank you so much. We had a great audience, and I want to thank Holly, Sujean, Lizzy, and Susan. Please go out, their books are there. You at least have to take home one of each, if not more. They're amazing for gifts. I already have a collection myself for all the little people in my life, plus for myself, because I find them inspirational. So thank you again, ladies.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron.